today's lecture, we will be dealing with the Chinese society, social classes and groups. I propose to split up into this whole discussion into some sections. First of all, there will be an introductory part, followed by the Chinese social classes and groups. And here I will be dealing with the peasantry, artisans, and other toiling people. Then there would be landowning gentry or the scholar gentry, and then the merchants. That is one section. Now, China, as we all know, is one of the largest countries in the world, and her territory being about the size of the whole of Europe. It is also the home of 56 nationalities, and majority nationality is a Han nationality, which comprises more than 95% of the Chinese population. And the other 55 nationalities are all minority nationalities, comprising the Mongols, the Hui, the Tibetan, Uyghur, Miao, Yi, Uzbek, and many others. Now, there are two important features of Chinese society. One is that China continues to enjoy the longest historiographical tradition in the history of the world. That is one thing. And the other part is that of all the feudal societies or of all the pre-industrial societies in the history of the world, China had the rare distinction of experiencing the feudal epoch, going through the feudal epoch for the longest period of time, surpassing all other countries. Now, the overwhelming majority of population, of course, consists of the peasantry, and the peasantry, along with the artisans and other toiling people, they stood at the bottom of Chinese society, and they constituted the exploited classes, the ruled classes in China. And at the top of the Chinese society, there was a landowning class, military oligarchy, and the gentry, which were also known as a scholar gentry. Actually, it was the gentry, landowning gentry, which constituted the main ruling class in China. And apart from this, there, of course, were the merchants. Merchants got a lower rank in the social hierarchy, but they were affluent, no doubt. They were economically very powerful, no doubt. The basis of the Chinese society was a family. That was the basic unit. And in fact, family was the state in miniature in China. And within the family, it was a father who was all-powerful. He was a patriarch. He was all-powerful. And he was also the supreme autocrat within the family. And he enjoyed absolute power over all family matters. It was he who exercised control over the family property and income. And he had a decisive voice in arranging the marriages of the children. Now, what is important is that whether in slave society or in feudal society, the domination of patriarchy, the domination of age over youth, that was evident in the Chinese family. That is an important feature of the Chinese family or the Chinese society. Now, this domination of age over youth was perfectly matched by the domination of men over women. In the Chinese family, a girl did not have any rights whatsoever. The girls were universally illiterate. They had no rights over family property. They had no say, absolutely no say in their own marriages. And their status within the family was codified in the three bonds, quote unquote, the three bonds. It was these three bonds were emphasized by the Confucian scholars, Confucian philosophers. And these were, one was the bond of loyalty on the part of the subject to the ruler, the bond of filial obedience on the part of the son to the father, and the bond of chastity on the part of the wives, but never on the part of the husbands. This was the family, Chinese family. Coming to the peasantry, they constituted the overwhelming majority of the Chinese population, and it was not an undifferentiated class. It was split up into at least four sections. We have the rich peasant, we have the middle peasant, we have the poor peasant, and we have the landless peasant. And most of the peasants were under the grip of landowners who subjected them to exploitation of various types. One of the main forms of feudal extraction was the exploitation was the extraction of rent. That is common, quite common everywhere else, not just in China, but in all other feudal societies. And the extraction of rent by the landlords to the maximum possible extent was the typical form of feudal oppression. And in fact, the peasantry was exploited to such an extent by the landowners that they were deprived not only of their surplus product, but also a part of their necessary product. That is, surplus product is that which is something above what was needed for his basic subsistence. And the necessary product was that what was the basic minimum needed for his own subsistence. Now, the surplus was, they were deprived of the surplus, and they were also deprived of a part of the necessary product. That was the situation. And the Chinese feudal system created its own tax collectors, its own courts, its own police system, all of which served the interests of the ruling classes in China. It was always the oppressed sections that were at the receiving end. That was a common feature. Joseph Needham, in his monumental study on science and civilization in China, has suggested the term bureaucratic feudalism while he dealt with Chinese feudalism, because he feels that there was a unique combination of economic and political power in China. Besides peasants, the artisans formed another important group in the social hierarchy. And here we have the town-dwelling artisans. We have also the village-dwelling artisans. Now, town-dwelling artisans formed themselves into guilds. Guilds were there in every country of the world, you know. And it was they who exercised control over production and marketing in each professional sector, such as weaving, shoemaking, bamboo handicrafts, gold working, and so on and so forth. And besides the town-dwelling artisans, there were part-time rural artisans who devoted one part of their time to artisanal production and another part to the cultivation of the soil. So there were part-time artisans and part-time peasants. As in our country, as in India, there was a blending of agriculture and handicrafts in the countryside of China. And apart from the artisans, there was another large section in rural society made up of day laborers, the vagabonds, the boatmen, the peddlers, and porters, who also constituted part of the exploited classes in China. From the ancient days, China witnessed the emergence of a new social class of a very different type, which could not be seen either in India or in the West. This social class is known as the gentry class, which actually formed the ruling class in China. And they were also known as scholar gentry or scholar officials. This Chinese gentry should be distinguished from the European gentry, or let us say the British gentry. In the case of Britain, we have the emergence of the gentry after the dissolution of the monasteries, and this English gentry was landowning gentry, but which had capitalistic tendencies. It was not a feudal gentry. It was a capitalistic gentry owning landed estates. On the other hand, the Chinese gentry had nothing to do with capitalism. The Chinese gentry was a typical feudal gentry, feudal in character, and J.K. Fairbank holds that the Chinese gentry could be understood only in a dual political and economic sense, as connected both with land holding and office holding. They had economic power and political power, both of them. And actually, they constituted the ruling class in China, and they exercised control over power, over knowledge, and also over land. The point is that in practice, individual members of the gentry did not possess or did not hold all of these resources or in equal quantities. There were some educated people who failed in the Confucian examinations, and there were still others who refused to take the Confucian examinations. Side by side, only a limited number of the gentry became office holders, got top official posts, doing political and administrative duties. Now, as for the ownership of land, it was no doubt the main source of economic power in ancient China, as also in medieval China, no doubt. And it was generally possessed by men who had Confucian degrees. That is, who had passed a series of Confucian examinations. But side by side, there were also members of the gentry, there were also landowners who had no Confucian degrees. And there were also impoverished scholars. That is, scholars who passed the test but who were poor, who were impoverished. But the point is that even though they were impoverished, they were poor, since they were members of the gentry, they had many avenues to get rich, particularly by marriages, so that they could inherit the wealth, the property of father-in-laws. So this was the gentry which enjoyed in various degrees in economic, political, and they had power, and they had also education. The members of the gentry also enjoyed various legal privileges. They were entitled, as in other places, to special treatment in the courts, and if they were found guilty of committing a crime, their sentence, their punishment would always be lower than the statutory penalty. That is quite clear. And the gentry families, they lived in the walled towns and not in the villages. That is very important. The towns were walled because there had always been threats of attacks by the rebel peasants. It has been pointed out by the French historian Chénaud that there was a threat of constant peasant revolts. So in order to make themselves safe, they raised walled towns and they lived inside the walled towns. And the gentry formed a stratum of families actually based on landed property, who stood in the midway between the peasant masses on the one hand and officials and the merchants who were in charge of the overall administration and commercial activity on the other. But actually they constituted the real ruling classes in China. Trade, commerce and manufacturing activities developed to a very large extent in ancient China and also in medieval China. But despite this, the merchants were given a low status in the social hierarchy. The main reason, according to Chénaud, was that the inferior status represented the defensive reaction on the part of the feudal society. Defensive reaction against economic forces that were threatening the social equilibrium. Since the society was feudal and the merchants were representing new elements, new forces, so the people felt, the ruling classes felt that it might be their rise to power, rise to economic power could legitimately pose a threat to the existing social order. But one point is that the Chinese ruling classes time and again became dependent on the merchants for money. Whenever there was any crisis, they were to turn towards them. And they, in fact, the rich merchants were accommodated through the back door. And what was the back door? They could purchase Confucian degrees. They could buy Confucian degrees by paying money. And when one merchant got a Confucian degree, there was an enhancement in his social status. So he could, in this way, he could bring his social status into harmony with his economic power.
You said that China has the longest historiographical tradition in the world. Why is it so?
Definitely the Chinese had strong historical sense. And the important point is that it is frequently possible to identify the year, the month and the day when a particular event took place in China. There is a definite continuity in Chinese history, definite continuity unlike any other country. And right from the days of the Xia dynasty or the Shang dynasty, when we have the oracle bone inscriptions, first inscriptions, and which is also a unique feature, inscriptions on tortoise shells or scapulae, on the bone of the oxen or on the shell of the tortoise. These are called oracle bone inscriptions. These are first inscriptions in China. And 844 BC is the year, which they say, from which there is a definite continuity in the earlier period, there was some discontinuity, but after 844 BC, that is the Western Zhou dynasty, there is a definite continuity in Chinese history. In fact, there is an event when an alchemist, he applied for some grant, financial grant to the ruler. And the year, month and the day, all were mentioned, recorded. In China, it was year, month and day at that time. And that was mentioned. Now, that was something which is unique. In Indian history, we hardly have any written history in the ancient period. We have, of course, we have Kautilya's Arthashastra, which is not history, but which is a treatise on statecraft. So, China or India does not stand in comparison with China, or any other country does not stand in comparison with China in historiographical tradition. That is something which is a unique feature in Chinese history.
China has the longest experience of feudal echo. So
yes, feudal epoch, yes.
Why is it so?
In the history of China, there was a succession of social stages, no doubt. We have slavery during the period of the Zhou dynasty, or earlier also from the Shang, then followed by Zhou, Western Zhou, Eastern Zhou. Now, and it was during the period of Confucius. We'll deal with Confucius. That is 6th century BC. There were two other things also. Spring and autumn period, that was followed by the warring states period. These were periods of intense warfare among feudal principalities. Because in the slave society of China, even in the Eastern Zhou dynasty, there was the emergence of feudal elements. Decline of the slave society that had been appearing, the new social forces had been appearing. There are many slave rebellions also against Zhou rulers or governors of different provinces, different states. Now, in fact, Chinese feudalism or forces of feudalism appeared in Chinese history in the 6th century BC or 5th century BC. That was the period. In the case of India, we have it in the late Gupta period, that is 4th century, 5th century AD. In the case of Western Europe, 5th century AD, who followed the Western Empire, 476 AD. So there is an almost 1,000-year gap between the emergence of feudal forces in China and the emergence of feudal forces and feudalism either in India or in Western Europe. Of course, the feudal empire in China emerged under the Qin dynasty, Qin Shi Huangdi, 221 BC, that was the year, who raised the Great Wall of China. He started the Great Wall of China. So this is a rare distinction, and it is because of this that class contradictions were very sharp in China. Class contradictions between the feudal lords and the serfs or the peasants, that was very sharp. And that is the reason again, which is another important feature which I have not mentioned. And that is, in China you have the largest number of peasant rebellions in the history of the world. Because it had passed to the feudal stage, experienced feudalism for the longest period of time. And that is the reason why class contradictions were very sharp, very intense. And that is the reason again why peasant revolts are in various forms, not always like war, but revolts of different types, protest movements of different types, riots of different types, of different dimensions, that took place in China. So that is something which is not seen in any other country of the world.